Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Nicole. Welcome back to part two of my interview with Habeeb Akande. We talked all about relationships, femininity, communication, and now we're going to continue. You might hear some things that you didn't know about, like squirting and the pleasure gap and all of that stuff, what men really feel and want women to know. So stay tuned for part two. Welcome to the Secret Formula of Femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Montero, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Okay, so we were talking just about what happens in the man caves, what happens in the woman caves, what attracts men, what about women is attractive to men. I think that was the last thing we were kind of talking about. Um, so what do you think women need to understand about men? And I'm going to also ask a little bit, I want to get into a little bit of what's in your books, but just like, what is that missing piece that is hard for women to understand?
I think that a lot of women think that, I mean, my wife said this to me a couple of months ago that a lot of women think that men are emotionless and do not have the capacity to love. And I
Mm.
strongly disagree with that. So
Uh-huh.
I think that women need to have a level of empathy with men that we've been raised, we have our own ideals or understandings of what it means to be a man, how to love, and even how to emote. And I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes a number of women, they're well versed in terms of understanding women, themselves and other women, but don't necessarily take the same amount of time to try and understand men from his perspective. And rather than seeing us as like machines or robots or having all these assumptions about how we should behave, I think sometimes I would like women to have a bit of empathy for men in
Uh-huh.
terms of trying to understand where we're coming from, because a number of us as men, we are performing as well in terms of to these ideals or these expectations of what it means to be a man, a partner, a husband, because of societal pressure, because of family pressure, even pressure from our own partner that we don't want to disappoint.
Yeah.
So although we may not express our emotions the way sometimes women may like us to, but don't think that we are emotionless or
Mm-hmm.
we're not caring or considerate. It's just that we present it a different way. And even where men may be reluctant to maybe go to therapy or counseling, sometimes we need some time because in our world, again, I'm talking amongst men, that is seen as something that is emasculating. So that's why
Mm-hmm.
for even for a number of men, and some men buy into that, it can be quite difficult for them even to open up because in their world they're going to be belittled. There's people's going to
Yeah.
speak about them in a bad way. So that's why, whereas in for a number of women, they've got a lot of people that's supporting them to go to therapy, to go to
Mm-hmm.
counseling. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why, if
Mm-hmm.
anything, it's even yes, it's like a no-brainer. You know, if there's an issue, why don't we, follow this path? Whereas a lot of men, it's like the opposite. So if he's going to do it, sometimes men might have to do it in silence or in secrecy,
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
telling these because he's not going to get the validation and support from his male peer group as well as his own internal thoughts or understandings of what it means to be a man. And again, so I just think that sometimes try and come, you might have to come down to our level because
Uh-huh.
I think a lot of women are more emotionally intelligent and have more
Mm-hmm.
empathy than men have. But I think sometimes, whilst women are, I would argue, are more emotionally intelligent than a number of men, but that's in relation to women's feelings, but not in relation to men's feelings.
Yes. I
So,
think
so
you hit the nail on the head because my pet peeve is like when women, we just kind of feel like we have ownership over emotional intelligence. And I'm like, well, ours is a bit different. We're very verbal. We tend to be very like we value articulation but for men, it's really learning to be a little more observant as to what his behaviors might be displaying. And I think it takes patience. And I hear a lot of pushback where it's like, well, why do I have to do that? He should just learn. And I'm like, but we're designed differently. We don't, verbalization is great, but it's not the end all and be all. And sometimes there's other means of communicating.
Yeah. And even like this, the conference that I came back from, it, again, it was so inspiring. There's so many things. I can even write a book about it. But something else
Wow.
that came about, so there was a presentation with a married couple, and the husband at this time he was talking. So he'd been married, I think, 30 plus years.
Mm,
On the face of it, perfect couple, two wonderful children. They're like the darlings of the community. He's doing very well in his career. She's also doing very well in her career. So on the face of it, it looks like a perfect couple. But they were talking about the trials and tribulations that they had to
mm,
encounter during their marriage, especially the first like 10 to 15 years.
mhm,
And the husband, he revealed that he had been abused both physically as well as sexually. And again,
mm.
to say this in a public platform in
Wow.
northern Nigeria and very conservative, religious community, it took everyone aback. Even I was extremely shocked. And but he was also speaking about that when he told his wife about this, because it happened to him obviously at a relatively young age. And then when he told his wife about this, and they had some difficulties when they first got married, she said something, but she used what happened to him against him. And he said
Mm,
just that one statement, it took him maybe like 5 years to even to learn to trust her and to open up to her again. And he was just explaining that sometimes as women, as much as women will talk about like, like you mentioned about being emotionally intelligent and having empathy, sometimes women aren't aware of what they say or even how they may say certain
mhm,
things. And that can close the man off. And he said he was still, committed to her, looked after her, but he wasn't able to be open. He said for at least
mm,
5 years. And he said even now, he's still there's some things that he's just revealing about his past and what's happened. It takes a while. So when we're talking about earning someone's trust and again for men, trust and respect is a big thing.
yeah.
And you're not going to get overnight, especially if we feel that we've been betrayed or disrespected. It can take a while. So that's why sometimes patience. I know it's easier said than done, but just realize that I'll ask women to look at men as human beings as well. That's one of
Yes.
the biggest takeaways.
It
We're human
seems
beings as well.
simplistic, right? But wow, that is, I
Yeah,
think if we just pause into that story of like the how a man can feel betrayed and he may not really say anything about it, but it's very internal.
internal. Yeah, so that's something
Mhm.
that as a lot of men, if we feel betrayed or someone has said something, use something against us, we might not say it, and we
Mm,
hold that inside, and it can be for many years. And the woman might be thinking, and again, maybe the man should then he should probably vocalize or explain how he's feeling. But
mhm,
that's where sometimes I think the same way, not to mother us, but the same way I think when there's an issue, especially with a woman and her child, like a male son, she would want to try and understand what's the issue and trying to, and she'll be patient. There's no limit.
yeah.
Similarly, try and have that same level of empathy or try and have that understanding or try and think the best with your husband, with your male partner. So I think
Mhm,
sometimes we have that the same way as a number of men, we value those relationships in terms of being a father, but we might not necessarily value those same relationships in terms of how we should be as a husband. Likewise, I think as wives to have that same level of empathy and understanding with your husband as you would do if it was your son. I just think that
yeah.
yeah, that's I just think it's extremely important because yeah, oftentimes I think we do want the same thing, but our tolerance levels for our partner is
Mm,
not given the same level of what you would like as other members maybe of not only the family or other relationships, even like a male friend or like a female friend.
yeah, yeah. Wow, that's I think we all need to let that sink in. Yeah, because there's some things that when you say them, it's hard to you can't take them back and it's hard to repair. And I believe everything can be repaired, but it just takes time. I'm that friend that my girlfriends can't stand because when they start complaining about their man, like I'm not the person that will encourage you to throw your relationship away or to just see things from your perspective and we're all just dumping on him because I don't think ultimately it's helpful to the woman, as well as to the man. But so I'm probably the one that gets on my friend's nerves. One of my friends was like, "Yeah, I know you're going to take his side." And I'm like, "No, I'm not taking his side. It's just that I'm not going to jump on him because this is a person you committed to. So it must mean something, right? Like it's not just Joe Schmo on the streets. So I'm not going to go and bash him just because you're in a place of feeling hurt. Like it's not going to do you a disservice. They're like, yeah, yeah, I know. But sometimes, and I'm like, I'm not, like you said with men code, like, I'm not about to be up here and bashing somebody's husband. And then you guys make up and, you're like, well, why would you say that? So, but yeah, I think it's so important for us to have patience with each other. And that brings me to patience, what that looks like. So a big part of our connection to each other as men and women is sexual and sensual. And you write a lot about that and you've written some history books, but a lot of your work around female desire and the pleasure gap. Just tell us, what is the pleasure gap, first of all? And how do you see the distinction between sensuality and sexuality? Or like, how do you write about that?
Okay, great. So the pleasure gap, also known as the orgasm gap, is the inequality or the discrepancy between men and women's sexual satisfaction levels. So
Mm,
when we're speaking about orgasm, there's many studies that report that men orgasm or experience sexual climax far more frequently than women during intimate relations. So men 95% of the time, or 90% of the time when a man is having intimate relations, he will experience an orgasm or sexual pleasure. Whereas with women, it ranges from as low as 30% to
mm,
65%. So in most cases, men will be experiencing orgasm or sexual pleasure or climax, whereas women oftentimes wouldn't. There's also the pleasure gap could also refer to experiencing pleasure, not necessarily the orgasm in and of itself. So we know that there are a number of women who, unfortunately, when they're intimate with their partner, they experience pain. Whereas for
mm,
men, that's near enough non-existent. So there's also that idea that for men, so when I'm speaking to men, the idea of sex, orgasm, and pleasure, they're interchangeable. Meaning, in most cases, if we think about
mm,
sex, it's going to be enjoyable, it's going to be pleasurable, and it's going to experience a sexual climax, an orgasm. Whereas for women, that's not necessarily the case. And that's also why there's a disconnect, because for a number of women, sex could be extremely painful. It could be something that's not enjoyable. It could be something where they feel that they're being used by their partner and they're not fulfilled. So there is this inequality. It's a social, cultural phenomenon which exists across many
mm,
cultures. In some cultures, it's more pronounced than others. And a lot of my work is trying to close the pleasure gap or close the orgasm gap so women experience sexual fulfillment and sexual pleasure and sexual orgasms if that's what they want, just as much as their male counterparts. A documentary I made with the BBC in
mm,
2020 explored this. So I wrote one of my books, Kunyaza, was looking at the Kunyaza tradition and how it's potentially it can help solve or resolve the pleasure gap. And I did a workshop in 2020, which the BBC came did some filming, and the two of the producers were white British Catholic women, so from a
mm.
completely different ethnic and religious perspective, but they
Uh-huh.
were speaking about the same issues in their communities, that they came from a very conservative Catholic culture. One of them, the other one was from a more of a liberal culture, shall we say, and had multiple sexual partners, but both of them said that they didn't experience an orgasm or climax up until maybe their late 20s. And it was
Mm,
something that there was a disconnect because when they would speak to their current or previous male partner or partners and male friends, a lot of men were oblivious to this. So again, it's
mm,
this issue where women are more aware of this issue, whereas a number of men are completely oblivious to this. It might be because of the information or misinformation that we've heard from pornography and also the man cave as well, because a lot of
uh-huh.
men, when we speak amongst ourselves, oops,
Mm.
that's my kitchen, that's not my stomach, just in case you're
Okay.
wondering what that noise is. Because it sounds like my stomach, like, are you not
I know.
hungry? No, it's plumbing work. So I do apologize.
Okay.
Do
Yeah,
apologize.
that's
Yeah,
okay.
so like I said, so you have the pleasure gap, which is the inequality or this discrepancy between sexual satisfaction levels between the genders. And the work I'm doing is trying to close that. And it's mainly aimed because a lot of the work that you find with sex educators in terms of closing the pleasure gap is teaching women how to experience an orgasm. And
Mm,
oftentimes they will focus on the woman herself. And okay, that's great in helping the woman understand her body and learn about her body in different ways. But what you find is that if a number of women are experience climaxing by themselves, like by way of self-pleasure, this, that, and the other. That's fine. But then how are they then still going to be able to experience pleasure when they're in a relationship with a man?
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes it's how do you negotiate intimacy? How do you negotiate what your wants and needs are? So if you've been taught the same way a lot of men can experience pleasure by themselves if they're watching pornography or masturbating, and women are doing likewise, we still have this issue that when they come together, they're not able to communicate with one
Mm-hmm.
another. So a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
work I'm trying to do is helping men or trying to teach men to help understand to be empathetic towards women and see it as it's your goal, not necessarily to make her orgasm, but to create a space and to facilitate a space where she can climax or experience an orgasm or squirting or what have you. So that's a lot of the work I'm doing is trying to close like the pleasure gap or the
Mm-hmm.
orgasm gap, so to speak.
And
And then,
for those who don't know, Kunyaza is
oh, sorry.
from, yeah,
So
East
yeah, so
Africa. Right?
yeah, so Kunyaza is a tradition and a practice from East and Central Africa.
Mhm,
It originated from Rwanda. It's a technique which has a reputation of helping a woman experience what we call the sacred water or
mhm,
gushing water or fluids, female ejaculation, squirting, or what have you. It's very common in Rwanda and neighboring countries like Burundi, parts of Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, where it's very common, so much so where like according to reports, up to 90% of the women experience squirting or female ejaculation. It's completely
mm,
normalized. So the sexual script in that part of the world and those cultures where female sexuality is not only celebrated and venerated, there's more onus placed on the man to ensure that his wife is sexually
mm.
satisfied. And the men are taught from a relatively young age about the female anatomy, about ensuring that the woman feels sexually satisfied, about creating a space where you're not a man until your wife climaxes. That's the sexual script. That's the
Yeah.
idea
So
of
your
masculinity.
masculinity is tied to her pleasure.
Yeah. So it's a total different understanding. It's something that I resonate with, and I thought, okay, this is really nice because I think this is something that hopefully men can buy into in terms of because we're quite aspirational and goal orientated. So rather than thinking about the jackhammer approach that we see from porn or the womanizing mandingo, where you want to have multiple sexual
Mm,
partners, where you often
mm-hmm,
see in Western society, you have a model which is actually saying that no, your value as a man is how you look after, treat, and please your woman, your wife. So it's not placed on like how many numbers of sexual partners you have. It's actually placed on how your wife feels and if she's satisfied and by you. So a lot of people are, really interested in the whole squirting phenomenon. For me, I'm more interested in the culture behind it. I believe every woman can experience squirting or ejaculation, but that's not the goal. The goal is women's sexual pleasure, women's satisfaction, however it manifests itself, whether it's in the form of experiencing the gush, whether it's in the form of experiencing climax, or whether it's in the form of being in a love and committed relationship where you're intimately connected with your spouse. So that's what the Kunyaza book looks at. I also talk about like the different types of orgasms a woman can experience, like the 40 different types, just so women know there's a range. Because
mm,
with many of the classical books of erotology referring to the study of intimacy, desire, and the art of lovemaking, whether from a cultural, religious, or philosophical perspective, the whole idea of that genre, of that science, is to understand different cultural practices and ethics from according to different in different parts of the world. So like the Kama Sutra, which many people are familiar with, that's
mm-hmm.
a book about Hindu erotology written from a Hindu perspective. And that book was actually written by a man who was, believe it or not, he was celibate. He wasn't even sexually active.
Oh,
Yeah, so he wanted to write a book and he spoke about the different practices that was going on in ancient India in terms of how to increase mutual pleasure. So
mm-hmm.
even the different positions which a lot of people are obsessed with nowadays, only about 25% of the original Kama Sutra deals with sex positions. And the idea of the sex positions was just talking about for people with different types of genital sizes, there are certain positions that maybe are more suitable in order to increase
Mm,
pleasure or enhance pleasure for both the man and the woman. So essentially it's about compatibility. But because when it was translated in the 19th century by a number of British and Europeans, and then was brought over to America and parts of Europe. They were just fascinated by the sex position, and that's what they spoke about, and that's what they concentrated on. So that's why now, when people think about the Kama Sutra, they think about the sex positions, and they lose sight of what the goal and the aim of that tradition was. So, so that's why, like even with the Kunyaza tradition, even when I made the documentary, the BBC, then
Mm.
everyone was just thinking, oh, I'll do workshops. They're just thinking, okay, you're going to teach me how to squirt, or men just coming saying, okay, give me the 5 things I need to know. And then all of a sudden, my wife and my partner's come to squirt. And they're trying to help them understand the culture behind it. And that
Yeah.
shouldn't be the goal. Like the whole idea of the squirting imperative or the orgasm imperative is not something that I subscribe to, as in that you have to have an orgasm to experience a sexual
Hmm.
fulfilling encounter. I don't believe that. But because a number of people nowadays are very much about the performative aspect of sex,
Yeah.
and for some men, squirting is a form of like sexual applause, where they feel that if a woman is squirting, then they've done a good job, then they're
Mm.
the man. It's about trying to give them different ideas of masculinity and pleasure. That it's not just about this gush of fluid or ejaculation or multiple orgasms. Just understanding it's about ultimately it's about love, intimacy, and connection and pleasure, and knowing that
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
woman has the right to pleasure, and that should be your goal as part of your husband, as being a husband. Part of being a provider is not only being a provider financially, but also being a provider emotionally and physically. And this is like again an idea of masculinity that is not really presented. And likewise with women and the idea of femininity, that women are entitled to pleasure and to experience pleasure and share it with their husband. This is again,
Hmm.
it's not this image of femininity is often not really kind of told in many circles, where people believe that the idea of femininity is just to be subservient to the husband
Hmm.
or to
Or
ensure that he's
performative
satisfied
or
or
yeah.
performative. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why with the work that I'm doing, I like to look at different cultures, especially Middle Eastern, Arab, Muslim cultures, as well as some African cultures. I also I've looked at some cultures in parts of South America, like Brazil, just to understand different understandings and cultural practices, and that which and the whole idea is I present these, and that which I think is beneficial or could be beneficial to the modern day reader audience, then you can obviously use it not only for yourself but also in your relationship. And obviously that which is not beneficial, you can leave it. And so
Hmm.
when we're talking about sensuality, when we're talking about the pleasure gap, what I don't want people to take away is that they have to do each and everything that I'm
Like a
presenting.
robot, right? Like
No, not
do
like a
this.
robot, because
Uh-huh.
that's unfortunately that's one of the problems, that people feel that it's like a tick box exercise, that I need to do the 64 skills of Kama Sutra. I need
Mm.
to find out the 14 types of female orgasms and do it. I need to find the five magic, I did one presentation, I was talking about the five magic spots, I called it, and I spoke about the A spot, U spot, K spot, I think C spot and G spot. And then someone panics and said, I need to know this before I die and do this to my wife.
Oh my God.
Not saying the whole idea is that because women are multifaceted and
Hmm.
multi-orgasmic and they have more pleasure zones generally than men, the whole idea is to discover what works for your wife, not that you have to do each and every one of them,
Yeah.
because that
Yeah.
can lead to performance anxiety, and where the woman feels she has to experience these different forms of pleasure just so the man is satisfied. And I said that's not the way these traditional books were written, and that wasn't how it should be understood. But because again, people are just thinking about, like I just need to master this, go to this course, master this, and then
Hmm.
implement it. It doesn't work like that. So yeah, the whole idea is just presenting different forms of femininity and pleasure within like heterosexual relationships. I think people can hopefully be inspired by and then and help them in their relationships. Because a lot of issues that we're going through nowadays, it's not really new. Like a lot of things that we're going through in terms of the so-called gender wars, the epidemic of female sexual dissatisfaction, shall we call it, or men feeling or women feeling disconnected emotionally from their partners. In many cultures, both African, Arab cultures, this has been spoken about for hundreds of years in many
Yeah.
texts.
Which
So
shows
that's
that it's been an issue. It's
it's
not
been an issue,
out
and
of
there's always
nowhere.
a
Uh-huh.
yeah, and there's always been professionals who come in different guises and forms. So nowadays, of course, we have therapists and counselors who are trained like yourselves. In traditional cultures, they were known as maybe the sengas, or
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
doctors, or like the village aunts, or like or the elderly wise uncles. So you had different people who are serving, not necessarily as who were serving as like the go-between, the mediators, to kind of help people who are having these issues in terms of marital conflict or intimacy conflict. So, because I think one of the things that I found really interesting as well about the Kunyaza tradition and the culture behind it in Rwanda as well is that not all of the emphasis was placed on the mother or the parent, that I need to know everything and teach my child everything, because
Yeah.
this idea that the parent should
Is
be the first point of calls for sex education, therapy, counseling, sometimes that's a bit too
Basic
much.
needs, like it's
Basic needs.
overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why
Hmm.
with these different cultures, it's understanding that okay, no, you had different people who are serving and acting in these roles, and we can kind of revive that. So especially for people who are quite traditional from a cultural perspective or religious perspective, you're trying to help people realize that no, this isn't new. You have got people that have been doing this historically. So you
Hmm.
shouldn't be worried or fearful that because you're going through issues in your relationship, especially in relation to intimacy, you're not the only one. It's not new. But there are remedies, there are solutions, there are people who kind of who can help them. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
hopefully answering the first part of the question.
yeah.
And then the second part, so sexuality and sensuality, very, very good question. So the way I understand it, and so sensuality refers to like the senses and um all of the five senses, where sexuality is more about um maybe linked to biology, or whether it's sexuality for reproduction or recreational purposes. Now, oftentimes when I speak about the differences between sensuality and sexuality, I've noticed that when I'm speaking to men, sexuality captivates them and they're more interested in it.
Hmm.
Sensuality, they look at it as that's for women, or that's about intimacy, and that doesn't relate. And for me, I argue that sensuality is as important, if not more important, than sexuality, and is something that is masculine as well as feminine, and men can subscribe to it. It's just that maybe the way it's packaged,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
oftentimes, like I said, when people think about sensuality, it's like, oh, it's intimacy, but without,
Flowy and
yeah,
yeah,
flowy,
without
and it's just
the uh-huh.
right, right. So it's just again, it's just maybe the packaging that when I'm explaining, because I think oftentimes women know and are aware of the differences, or sometimes actually, to be fair, when I've mentioned sexuality, people's first thought is it refers to sexual orientation.
Hmm.
So
Oh
sometimes think it's the
yeah. Okay,
capacity to
yes,
have
yes.
sex, or it refers to sexual orientation. So it just depends on I've noticed like the recipient of the message that I'm saying. Like some people, the first thing they'll think of is so even in my one of my books, so the subtitle Sexuality and Erotomology in Islam, someone said, you wrote a book about homosexuality. I said, what are you talking about? Sexuality and that's like, okay. Because the first thing when he heard sexuality, he thought homosexuality. I
Yes.
was like, okay. When I was referring to sexuality, the capacity to have sexual relations and the
Hmm.
desire to have sexual relations. So it has different meanings, but generally it's related to the act or the desire for physical intimacy, whereas sensuality is a more of a broader term. And I think it's one that I'm more inclined to. But I think it's just that unfortunately, especially when I'm speaking to men, they're not aware of the importance of sensuality and how it
Hmm. Hmm.
encompasses more than sex, the same way intimacy is more broad than sex. But because intimacy is a euphemism as well, and it can be used to refer to closeness and connection amongst two people who are not romantically involved, they would think, okay, intimacy, I don't know exactly what you mean. Or some people can, when they hear intimacy, they think straight away about sexual intercourse, or they can think
Yeah,
about pleasure. But the fact that it's an encompassing term, I think it's a better term to use. But it's also it's important to educate when we're speaking about sensuality. What do we mean by that? And I
yeah,
think same way like when we're speaking about pleasure, it's quite subjective as well in terms of what is sensual to one person is different to another. And that's where I think you need to have a more of a holistic, a more of a nuanced understanding of when you're talking about sensuality in terms of a particular person or people, because it might mean something different to another person. I'll give you another quick story. Again, when I was in Nigeria, there was a lady, she was saying that she said, what advice would you give to a woman? So there's a woman that has been reading a number of romantic novels and erotic
uh,
novels, and she's deeply in love with her husband. But on the second year of their marriage, she thought, let me try and do something, spontaneous and nice. So she had the bed with a lot of rose petals,
oh, like they
ready to
do in the
surprise him.
book. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So she thought a nice romantic gesture. Now she's in northern Nigeria, again,
Uh-huh.
very conservative.
Yeah.
He's a very stoic man. And then when he walked into the room, he looked around and he's like, what is this? Have you joined the cult? And he totally misread it. But that's like an example. She's thinking this is sensual, this is sensuality, this is romantic. He looked at it like red represents the devil. These flowers
Oh,
represents, yeah,
okay.
so his interpretation of these petals, like these rose petals, was like a cult, like she's joined a jinn or something
Yeah.
like that. So it's just an
Like
example of she
complete communication breakdown.
right, right. So it's not that what she did was incorrect, but again, that's
Yes.
where she might have been thinking, "Oh, this is a great idea," and I imagine her friends were saying, "No, he would love this," and he's just thinking, what's happened to my wife? Or you
Yeah.
have instances where someone might interpret something which is sensual to be something which is linked to something that is not nice in a good way. So, for example, there are some even items of clothing that unfortunately some people perceive it to be, oh, only certain type of people wear this.
Hmm.
That is, and that's something that's also quite problematic. So that's why when we're talking about these terms, especially in the realm of sexuality, sensuality, and eroticism, it's understanding the cultural context and how people understand what it means. Because you find that even there'll be people, even when I speak to people from the States, they will think about, they will use terms like sensuality, um, or like fire in a nice way for a woman that they desire. But if it's a woman that they don't desire, all of a sudden it's she's masculine. So it's the same
Okay.
woman, but because it's a woman that they look as desirable, then these same terms is a beautiful thing and it's something that is desirable. But if it's a woman that they don't desire, then all of a sudden they'll use it to emasculate
A
her.
disparaging term. Yes,
Disparaging term,
yes.
yeah.
Uh-huh. Or to effeminate her, right? Like to take
Or to,
away her femininity.
yes.
Wow. So as I'm listening to you, what comes to mind is like all of it is communication. And again, it's like understanding how we communicate. So for women, like they say, the most important sex stimulation or sex organ is our minds. And sometimes though, what I've noticed with women is they want to wait until the desire is there. And sometimes you have to start and the desire will come once the engagement happens or the stimulation happens. And then I'm thinking like with men, sometimes the sexuality is a way to express themselves. So like it's not always just words. Like sometimes my husband has this saying like the most important decisions are made between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., which is basically the time you're intimate with your wife. And then you're relaxed and she has your ear and like it's not when you're in the tenseness of the bustle of the day to day and everybody's talking at each other. So I think it's just fascinating to hear those ways that we communicate with each other. I think we could just go on and on about every single aspect. And I'm going to definitely have you back and we're going to do some lives because I want you to, like, you just talked about 14 orgasms, 5 magic spots, like squirting, sacred waters. I mean, there's a lot that I think the listening audience will want to know more about. So we have to definitely pick this up. But I think I just appreciate um such a respectful engagement from with a male female perspective. I think it's so needed. And I think the last thing you said, or the second to last thing you said about for people to know this is not new, so you're not alone if you're experiencing intimacy issues or issues or communications issues. These texts and these books were written thousands of years ago. So people were struggling with it then. Don't think you're so alone in your struggles now. And I know social media makes it seem like, like, oh, this generation and love is lost. Like, no, these issues have always been talked about, and we have the pleasure of being able to work through it. So I really appreciate that. I always like to end with a hopeful, like I'm such a romantic. I don't want people to give up on love, on marriage, on intimacy, on fulfilling connection and just feeling that love and healthy connection, I think is the key to life. So I'm always going to find a way to be like, no, guys, don't give up on it. But I don't know if you have like a final word or something that would even encourage both men, or my audience is mostly women though, women to not feel hopeless about love, sensuality, sexuality, whatever it is.
Yeah, I loved what you said, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I just think that, yeah, not to give up on love, um, not to give up on yourself as well, and not to think that you are not worthy of love and desire and pleasure. And everything happens in God's time. I don't think you should compare yourself to others as well, because I think that can also be an issue where you think that how come I haven't got such and such? And even if you've gone through a difficult or bad experience, God willing, you'll get something even better. So I just think I'm somewhat of a romantic as well. I think maybe
Mhm.
it's part of because my name is Habib, meaning
Uh-huh.
blood.
Lover or
So
love, right?
yes, and it's something that I didn't really embrace until again, well, I was gonna say later on in life, like I'm
Yeah.
really old, but to my mid
In my
twenties. 'Cause
80s.
I didn't even like that name, but
Mm.
it's something which again, if you've got certain values, and I think a lot of people have got some values in terms of like being a romantic, don't be ashamed of that. Because I think
Yeah,
this
yeah.
idea that you need to have, just hookup culture and just have meaningless intimacy, meaningless sex, if that's not something that you buy into and that you feel comfortable with, even if you're one and by yourself amongst a number of people saying this is where it's at, you don't need to kind of, don't discount yourself and don't devalue yourself and just
Hmm.
again stick to your principles and God willing you get what you rightly deserve. But I think it's also good, like you said, to leave on a positive note where people are thinking about not despairing, because I think that's one of the worst things in the world that you can have, to despair from not only the
Yeah.
mercy of God but the mercy of desire and having a loving fulfilling relationship. But that being said, anyone who is going through a difficult time, to not feel that your relationship defines you. Because I
Mm.
think that's also one of the, you can be a casualty of love, where you think because
Mm.
this is something that you've wanted throughout your whole life, if you're going through some difficulties, especially again if it's not your own doing, don't feel that this is something that you deserve.
Yeah.
This is
Don't
just something that might have
internalize
happened
it.
in life.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't internalize it. I think that's extremely important. So while you should definitely aspire and seek love, especially if you're not in a healthy, committed relationship, if you're going through a difficult relationship, you shouldn't feel that you've had this and now you're going through a difficult period, so you have to suffer in silence, because that's also where I think oftentimes people can weaponize love against
Mm.
women and say that this is part of love. The same way you experience the sweetness of love and intimacy, now you have to experience the suffering and the thorns of what comes with it. And I just don't subscribe to that struggle. I struggle love or struggle marriage that some people
Hmm.
purport that abuse is part of being in a loving long-term
Hmm.
relationship. So, but in saying that, end with love. I think that's the most important thing, to never give up
Yeah.
on love.
Thank you so much, Habib. This has just been, like I said, there's going to be a two, three multi-parts of this. Everybody, I'm going to make sure I put the links to Habib's website, IG handle, his where you can purchase his books. There's multiple books, but I definitely recommend Kunyaza. I have two of your books, and so just check out his work. Your mind will be blown, and hopefully you'll get some enlightenment, not just about relationships, but like you said, about yourself, because I think that is the most important relationship, our relationship with God and our relationship with ourselves. Those are key. So thank you so much, everybody. I will see you on the next episode of the Secret Formula of Femininity. I have been talking to Habeeb Akande, and I'm Dr. Nicole. Take care.